Hi, this is Infinity Plus One here, and this is my audio review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Enjoy! Okay, so before I get started, I just want to give a little bit of a recap into my view of the first Guardians of the Galaxy film. I'm actually quite a big fan of the original. It's probably my fourth favorite of the Marvel movies to date. Love the original quite a bit. I think the music and the characters for the original film are perfect, but sadly to say, the sequel just doesn't hold up in comparison to the original film. I really hate saying this. I honestly believe Marvel's first miss, and it really sucks to say that. I walked out of this movie and I just didn't know what to think. I was really disappointed, to be honest. I really wanted to love this movie. I really thought that James Gunn was going to knock this one out of the park, but it's like he forgot how to tell a story, and it really is disappointing. Look, I'll give you a basic rundown of the plot, and then I'll get into the things I liked and disliked about it, and overall what I think. There are three basic plots to the movie that all kind of converge at the end. The first plot is that the Guardians of the Galaxy, there's the Guardians doing a job for these gold people that doesn't kind of pan out as smoothly as they would like, and in the end result ends up them getting in conflict with them. The second is Star-Lord meets his father. Star-Lord's father basically explains Rocket and Groot being left on the planet and the rest of the crew going with Star-Lord's father to the planet Ego. It's at that point where, without getting into spoilers, the plot kind of stalls at that point. Because you've got Rocket and Groot are on the planet fixing the spaceship, doing repairs on it, and Peter and Star-Lord and Drax and Gamora have gone off with Star-Lord's father to his home planet of Ego to basically so Star-Lord can find out about his father and why he left his mother, and basically the origin story of his relationship with his mother and everything that kind of resulted from it, why Star-Lord's dad did the things that he did. And that's all well and good. All that sort of stuff's fine. But the problem is there's no villain for this movie, and there's no mission. In the initial movie, they had an objective, the Horcrux of the movie, if you will. There was something that they had to obtain, and they went on this mission as a ragbag team of misfits, and through that mission they became a family. And in this movie they start out, they should be a family, but the thing is, friction between them, and this is one of the things that I really disliked about the movie, is that these elements of friction are not sort of explained at all. They're just kind of there, and then when you find out the explanation for them, it doesn't really fully make sense as to why these characters are kind of going at each other, because you would think that, considering the initial movie, they never had that kind of aggression towards each other, and if it just doesn't the explanation that they give for why these characters are not getting along is not fully explored. It doesn't make that much sense when you consider that they were getting along fairly reasonably in the first film. So now that gap between the first and the second film, why all of a sudden do these two characters have conflict that, they may not have been the best of buds, but I mean, they weren't antagonizing each other in this way. And then the resolution for that problem just doesn't seem to sort of add up either. It doesn't come to a head. That the problem with it is it feels like it was a plot device. It was there just for a story arc. For the sake of a story arc, it really wasn't a necessary part of the film. The next thing that I have the problem with is that the movie, lacking a clear villain, kind of makes the whole plot of the film quite aimless and disjointed. You kind of spend the first 2 acts of the film just waiting for the movie to get started until, I looked at my watch and I'm like, oh shit, this is the film. And while there's some good character development between Star-Lord and his father and Drax and Mantis, and even Star-Lord and Gamora, the end result is kind of good character development, but there's no plot to when you have no major antagonist for 80% of the film, there's nothing to kind of push forward with. On the other end, yes, okay, you have Rocket and Groot, you know, and they kind of get jammed up in a situation because they're not part of the main crew. It kind of feels a little disjointed because you keep bouncing back from the plot of Star-Lord with his dad, and then it cuts back to Groot and Rocket, and that kind of just keeps going for about halfway into the third act, I would say, is when they kind of all join up. And that's kind of the problem, is you have half of, you know, you have two prominent characters in the Guardians team separated from the main crew, and it really kind of disjoints the film, and it really zaps the pace out of the storytelling. If they were all together, there would be a more coherent, so I think you would have made a more coherent story. Another thing I really didn't like about the movie was the gold characters. They really, in a sense, they were unnecessary after maybe the first act. They really didn't do anything in the overall plot of the story. It's like, yeah, there would have been better ways to get the plot to the point of Star-Lord's father without having to constantly bring them back, because really they were unnecessary after the first act, and they just weren't that interesting. Even though they're not the main villain in the film, they're like the semi-villain sort of. They're the antagonists, I guess you would say, but they're not the villain. They just don't really matter. They're kind of cattle fodder for the film. Even when they're attacking them, there's no one in danger because they're all flying the spaceships that they fly remotely. So there's no real sense of peril on their end, and there's no stakes to it. They're not very interesting characters because they all look the same. They're all pretty bland as far as villains go. They're given really no backstory whatsoever. So ultimately, you don't particularly give a shit about them as characters, and you just kind of like, oh, they're just like, you know, there to push the plot along. And the problem with that is, because it's so obvious that that's what they are, it really pulled me out of the film. As I was watching it, I'm like, oh, this is them pushing the plot along to get them to the next story beat. That's the only reason that they're in the film beyond the first act, and it really grinds on you every time they come back. You're like, really? Why are you here? You're just so thankless. If you didn't like the villain from the first movie because you thought he was unbelievably generic, then these guys bring it to a whole new level. Without a doubt, they're like the most generic villains of the whole MCU. This is the final thing that I disliked about the film, is that the plot is extremely heavy in exposition. Like, pretty much every conversation that's being had is just huge exposition dumps. For certain characters, it's fine. For Star-Lord and his father, it's fine because obviously you got a backstory to fill in. But for all these other characters, they just go on these 2 to 3 minute dialogue dumps of basically heavy exposition, and you're like, would you really be having a conversation with this character in this level of depth, like right now? Like, why? It just doesn't really make sense to the plot. And again, it's another thing that pulled me out of the movie. I wish I could remember the character's name, but he's one of Yondu's guys, and essentially it's him and Gamora's sister, and he asks her a question and she goes into this big long-winded thing about her backstory, and you're like, why would you be explaining this to him? You're like, one, the character is not she doesn't present herself as someone that's really open with her feelings, so she's not going to just dump to this character that she's not really intimately involved with. This is just some random person on the ship to her. Why would she be having this kind of a conversation with him? She would just kind of fob him off and give him short answers. And it happens time and time again in this film with characters that don't mesh up Like, why are you having these conversations with these people? And it really just took me out of the film and made me... It not only took me out of the film, it just drained the pace of the film. And that's what really kind of bugged me, because I'm here waiting for something to kind of happen. Instead, you're getting these big, long exposition dump that just kind of dragged the movie down, rather than what the original film was, just like dominoes falling. It was like, this happens, that then causes this thing to happen, that causes this thing to happen. It had constant beats, the music flowed, whereas this movie, it's like the music is great, but it's like, because you've got these exposition dumps, they completely drag the movie down to the point that the plot is at a crawl. And it's like, yes, it flushes out the backstory of certain characters, but some characters don't really need that kind of flushing out. Yeah, I'll give you that Star-Lord's dad definitely does, for Star-Lord's sake, but I mean, a lot of the other stuff, it didn't need to be done, or it just didn't need to be done this way. It was very ham-fisted in the way they did it, and it just didn't play well to me. Now I'll get on to the things that I did like about the movie, because there were a few things that I really did think worked. The first one, and it was far and away the best thing of the film, is Drax is hilarious. Like, all the best one-liners of Guardians of the Galaxy, the nothing goes over my head because I've got quick reflexes and I'll catch it, stuff like that. He's got so many great one-liners, and they're just performed brilliantly by Dave Bautista. He's without a doubt the shining star of this film. Oh, the scenes that he has with Mantis, it's like, if you like the trailer bit where with him and Mantis where Star-Lord gets destroyed, you're gonna love the scenes with him and Mantis, because basically every time he's in a scene with her, it's hilarious, just because of the way they're so inept in their understanding of humor and stuff like that. And they're very Drax being a very blunt character and Mantis being a very naive character, they work very well together, and it's probably the best highlight of the film is those two characters. Whenever they were on screen, I had a smile on my face. That definitely dragged the movie up whenever they were on screen. Another thing I liked was Baby Groot. I thought Baby Groot, especially in the opening credits sequence, overall I really liked that. The opening is awesome. I love the opening. Groot's just hilarious in the fact that he gets like 3 or 4 moments during the film. One did kind of slow down the plot, but I thought it was funny enough that I kind of let it go. I don't really want to get into too much of what happens with Groot, but it's quite enjoyable, and I think if you've got kids, they're really going to love Baby Groot. Another thing I liked about the film is the music. The music, that's the one thing I'll give James Gunn 100%, is that he knows how to pick a track for a scene. The start and the end particularly, like the opening and closing scenes, he picked the perfect song for each. Overall, the soundtrack as a whole, it's definitely something that I'm going to consider buying. Or finally, I'll say, look, as I said, I really didn't like the first 2 acts of this movie, but when the movie does get going and the third act kicks up, it's a lot like Star Wars Rogue One. The movie is kind of disjointed for those first 2 acts, but once the movie gets going and it's clear what's going on, what's at stake, and what has to happen, the movie becomes fun. But the problem is with this movie, it happens far too late. But I will say, yeah, the third act is really good. Now, I will say the third act of Rogue One is far better, and that's what, for me, gives Rogue One a pass, because that third act is just fucking phenomenal in my mind. This third act is good. Problem is if this movie was that level of good the whole way through, I would have been fine with this. I would have been like, it's not as great as the first one, but I would totally have let it pass and said, hey, it's hard to replicate the hit of the original. I understand how difficult it is to try and replicate the original enough that people associate it with the original, and it's familiar enough, but at the same time diverge far enough away from it to be something new. I understand that that's a difficult thing to do. With this one, it's not that it's so far different, it's just that the story structure really doesn't work. And once they kind of get it working, it's too little too late. Overall, sadly, I think Guardians Volume 2 is not only the worst movie in the MCU, but this is actually the first movie that I wouldn't give a fresh rating to. If I was giving this a rating, I would say it's a 5.5 out of 10. At most, I'd give it a 5.75. For the ending, 5.75 is about the highest I would go. I can't even give it a 6 because the story just drags too much, and there are just too many things wrong with the movie to even give it a fresh rating, and it wouldn't be fair when I've slammed DC movies for the same problems that this movie suffers from. So ultimately, even though I didn't enjoy the movie, I would say if you've got young kids, take them to go see the movie. Don't take them to go and see it in IMAX or 3D or anything like that. Just go to a standard regular showing. If you can see it see a matinee or something like that, if you're not in a huge rush to see it, go see it in a matinee or on like a cheap Tuesday or something like that. But if you're just not interested, then yeah, I would say this is one that you probably watch it on Netflix when it comes out. Yeah, it's somewhere it really depends on where you sit as a comic book movie fan. If you just need to watch them, then try and, just go to a basic screening and try and go to a matinee screening of it or something like that, or a cheap Tuesday. Definitely wait and just watch it whenever you can kind of fit it into your schedule. You don't have to rush out the day that it comes out to see it. If you're just not really that interested, then I would say, yeah, leave this one until it hits Netflix and then watch it, and it's fine. You won't be really missing out on that much, which is kind of disappointing. I really wish that I could come back and say that I had better news than to say that I didn't like it, because so far I legitimately haven't disliked any of them so far. I've liked some Marvel movies less, but overall I would say they've all been above a 6 out of 10 for me. This is the first one that isn't, and coming off Captain America Civil War, this is really kind of disappointing for me. I really wanted this movie to be better than it was, but I guess, the one good thing about Marvel is there's always another movie coming out, so hopefully Thor Ragnarok is awesome. Well, that's really all I can think of saying about the film. Like and subscribe, say hi to your mum for me, and peace out.